The next speaker is Mishka. As I said, Mishka is the founder of Deconstructor Fun, and he's also a product owner at Rovio. And he's going to speak about 2019 prediction and market trends. So Mishka, thank you.
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you, Nadav. And thanks for having me here, and thank you for having me as a second or almost like a first speaker so I can get this out of the way and concentrate on listening to all of you. So, predictions for 2019. Just quickly a little bit of myself. So, black screen. Yeah, it's way easier with slides. Okay, so yes, so I am the founder and I'm of Deconstructor Fun, but that's sort of my side gig or a weekend job. So I have a little bit of a immigrant mentality. So I have two jobs, and my main job is head of studio at Rovio. And today we're going to talk about predictions of 2019. But in order to understand what's going to happen in the future, I think it's really important that we look at what has happened during the last year and further. So all of the information here has been gathered from three main sources. App Annie, so we've looked at games from last 2 years, both App Annie and Sensor Tower. We looked at the games from last 2 years. The top 500 grossing games, we aggregated those, we pulled their data, and looked at how they have performed. And finally, we used Game Refinery as well to develop a sort of our own approach of taxonomy. How do we categorize different games, and how do we see who's competing against whom in order to really see what's happening in the market? So what this means essentially is please take it with a grain of salt. There's going to be a lot of numbers, and they're not that accurate based on the sources, but they give you a sort of a view of where the market is heading, hopefully. And also, there's about 96 slides here, so I'm going to be pretty fast. I said immigrant approach is you overdo everything. Anyway, this is the market right now. And as you know, it's a battle between the CPIs and the LTV. From the CPI front, of course, we're trying to increase the marketability through IPs, through different themes, through the K-factor or organics. And from the LTV, from the game side, we're constantly trying to improve monetization as well as retention. Now, as I start going through, we're going to focus on 4 different categories. This is how we divided basically the market: casual, mid-core, casino, and sports. And the numbers over here is roughly the revenue that these all categories generate. But with a caveat, we've taken out most of the top Asian games away from here. So if the game generates about 75 to 80% from Asian country, we moved away because it's so different than the Western games. But we'll show some of them. And because there's 96 slides, that actually will cover only the 80% of the market. So I'll leave the casino and sports for the next time. So let's look at the casual games for the last year. As you can see, the revenue has been steadily increasing, while the downloads have been pretty much stable. And if we break the casual games into the subcategories, what we can see is we can see the location-based games, we can see arcade games, or hyper-casual, or so forth. We're going to go through that as well. We can see lifestyle games, puzzle, and simulator games. Roughly, the monthly revenue for all these categories, all the casual games, is about $600 million, between $600 to $700 million a month. And that's net revenue. So let's look at these categories and how they have performed during the last year. On the revenue side, we can see that the puzzle and simulation category has increased year-over-year revenue. What that means is the games have been better and better optimized. The new AR location-based games have failed to gain significant traffic, and then that's what we're talking about: Jurassic Park World, we're talking about Walking Dead. But nevertheless, the location-based games have been growing at a steady pace. And also, we can see that the lifestyle revenue have fueled by the increase of revenue. So on the download side, the image is a little bit different. The puzzle category keeps on declining slowly but steadily in terms of downloads. And this is probably due to lack of big game launches. Gardenscape launched in 2017. Toons Blast launched in 2017. Nothing huge has been in 2018. And naturally, the increase of CPIs, which are mostly even higher than with a lot of mid-core games right now. The second thing is the arcade games. And what we can see lately, and when we talk about arcade, I'll go further what type of games are those, but hyper casual is definitely there. They have been growing steadily and fast throughout the couple of last years. And only during the last couple of months, the downloads have actually been down significantly, which can indicate that there might be some saturation happening. And finally, what is really weird and interesting is that the simulation games, aka Heyday, Township, as well as some new ones in Hustle Castle and other ones, have been increasing. So there's a category that is essentially bouncing back from hibernation of about 5 years. Now, when we talk about casual games, here's how we see it. So there's categories and there's subcategories. And I'm not going to go through everything here right now because we have only 45 minutes. But as you can see, the yearly net revenues are over $6 billion, probably between 6 and 7. And I want to concentrate here and start first with the arcade games, which can be categorized in idlers, endless runners, and hyper-casual games. And as you can see, the revenues are really small because it doesn't show the ad revenues. In fact, they will be probably a lot larger. So let's start off with idlers. And what we mean by idlers is it's a game without any really core gameplay, just infinite amount of progression. So when we look at the idlers, it's we know that the majority of revenue is actually unknown because of the ad revenue, but we assume and we know that that the top games would be actually amongst the top 50 grossing games in the world. The revenue and downloads, as you see through the past year, are pretty balanced. So the games are growing, the downloads are growing, the downloads are going down, the games are declining, and there's constantly new games. So this kind of tells you that there's room to innovate in this category. Now, and we've seen a lot of innovation. So here's Trailer Park Boys, typical idle game, but they've added more elements. So there's a story element here, and we can see that these games are evolving. They're becoming deeper, and they're becoming more engaging, and hence their retention is increasing, hence the LTV is increasing. When we look at the hyper-casual ones, it's a little bit of a different story. And what we mean by hyper-casual games, it's basically games that anyone can just pick up and play. So anybody who has a finger can play these games. And the market is pretty clear, just like in anywhere. So you have CPIs and LTVs, and you're trying to get the LTV higher, so the low cost is of the essence. The focus is on novelty, so constantly new games that are a little bit proven based on the mechanics, but they're still looking new, are coming out. And the focus as well is on quick validation. A week of development, and you can see the numbers coming in, and you know whether you should continue or just start making a new game. When we look at the top casual games, or top hyper casual games, we can see that the in-app purchase revenue has been steadily increasing, which kind of tells you that players are maybe more inclined to pay for them, but still very small because it doesn't show the ad revenue. But the download side is actually very interesting. There was a major push with some of the new hyper-casual games coming in during the past month. And for the first time ever, it has really significantly dropped for two consecutive months. So we know that the majority of revenue is unknown. The top games are top grossing, and there's constantly new games. But the question is, given that this drop is happening, and there has been always talk of saturation, is this a saturation point for hyper-casual games, or what will happen to the hyper-casual games? What will be the next step? Sorry. And there's presumption that they will get deeper, just like happened with idle games, or we'll see just the market be more competitive and less launches. So either or, but I assume that the games will start be adding more arcade mechanics and just become more of a casual games. And that takes us to the second one, puzzle games. And as I showed before, the puzzle is by far the biggest category, with over $1 billion of net revenue a year. And especially when we're looking at the puzzle category, we kind of broke it down into 4 different elements. So we have the puzzle RPGs, the action puzzles, the words, cards, hidden objects, as well as the traditional puzzle games. And I want to start off by talking about puzzle RPG games, which is most interesting from now. So as you can see, some of the top games are breaking. Dragon Ball Z is down by 42%, but it still made over around $30 million in net revenue a month. We have Empires and Puzzles that have been growing significantly during the past year. Angry Birds 2, Legendary, and Best Fiends. So we can see that the stagnant user growth has been for a while. There's some new game launches, but other than that, it's quite limited. At the same time, the revenue growth has been massive. So it has gone up from the downwards of 40 million a month up to over 70 and almost 80 millions. And what we can see from this category happening is that there's ever more deeper and deeper meta game mechanics. So the games are so what this means is that some of the older games like Angry Birds 2 or Seriously's Best Fiends are starting to evolve to more of almost mid-core games like Legendary and Empires and Puzzles. And that's why it's a highly interesting market, not because of the evolution of it, not because of the huge top grossing positions, but just because of the constant growth of the market and especially of the certain games. And here are some net revenues from Legendary, and it actually experienced for the first time decline in revenues for the last 2 years. So it was growing revenues constantly for 2 years straight with pretty limited user acquisition. And what we can see happening in this category, it's evolving. There's more bosses, there's collections, there's all kind of social metagame features that are coming in together, and of course events that are monetizing through the gacha mechanics. So that's the puzzle RPG category, but let's talk about the biggest one, which is the puzzle. And puzzle is a little bit different. So we can see that the revenue has been pretty much stable. It has increased a little bit, dipped a little bit, but overall steady, very high revenues for most of the games. At the same time, the downloads have stayed steady, especially during the last year where we didn't have any major growth. So the revenue essentially looks like it has peaked, unless new games come out. Sorry. And here I wanted to kind of showcase one of the new games, and that's the newest big game in the category is definitely Toon Blast. So the game launched. The game in a nutshell is a tap to clear match game. It's developed by Peak Games, and it's a successor for Toy Blast, which is pretty much essentially the same game, but this has a different IP and some added features. Now, with frequent updates of about 50 new levels every 2 weeks, and revenue driven by optimization, competition, events, and especially social elements, we've seen developed by a tiny team of 15 people, we've seen some massive growth happening. So after initial launch in the late 2017, they've been growing revenue every month, pretty much every month since then. So there's still room for growth in the category, which leads to what makes the category interesting. So we've seen fantastic new launches like Gardenscapes and Toon Blast. We've seen amazing optimization in terms of, well, most of the King games and Peak games that have been just monetizing better and better with less downloads every month. And we've seen live ops coming into the puzzle games, so different kind of live ops, different kind of events. So what would it take for a new game to enter the puzzle category? Is there a new puzzle game coming in 2019? Well, if we look at the history, we've seen the start from the sort of a basic social saga elements, going into more of like resource and builders, then companions and upgrades, collection decoration, narrative decoration, now guilds and events, and then there's 2019. We haven't seen any I marked Toon Blast as 2019 because it's kind of in between, but real growth started in 2018. But in 2019, we haven't really, we don't know what's going to come in. But I'll make a prediction that what's not going to come in the puzzle. So there's been a lot of talk about PvP elements in the puzzle games because people think that they will monetize better once you add competitive elements. We've talked previously, it was also collaboration, you can send some gifts, but how about players competing against each other? And there are some games launched. Best Fiends Rivals, soft launched in 2017, removed from app stores in August 2018. We have Super Spell Heroes by Flare Games, launched in August. Current lifetime revenues quite low compared to the downloads, not looking very good. And we have Puzzle Fighter by Capcom, also launched in November 2017, shut down by July 2018. So if I have to make any prediction about puzzle games, is that the PvP puzzle games won't be a huge success in 2019. And here's my other prediction for casual games. So majority of the growth is still on the revenue side, not download. Live operation in terms of different type of events and optimization from existing games is driving revenue growth. So those games that have high DAU will be monetizing even better and affording even higher CPIs. Hyper casual is where the organic cheap growth was. I think that the sort of a traditional view of the hyper casual of the quickly done games is being saturated, and we'll see the movement towards more of an arcade game with a little bit more deeper mechanics. We've seen this happening in the idle games. So we'll see that the ad monetizing games, just like these, will still be extremely accessible, but they will actually focus on day 7 retention, maybe day 14 from now on, and maybe even day 30. So arcade and hyper-casual games will start maturing. Narrative and PvP and events focus can help new games enter entrenched genres, and this is something that might be happening in hyper-casual games, because what we can see is a lot of voodoo games, for example, that kind of show that there's a PvP element, and people download it, and then they notice that they're playing against AI. Maybe those games will start becoming PvP games for real. And finally, simulation location-based games will continue to grow through new launches and improved live operations. We know that Harry Potter is supposed to come in on the location-based game, so that's going to probably grow the market overall. And we've seen some great games coming in the simulation category this late and being very successful, like Klondike, for example, from UK. So that's casual games, and arguably I know a little bit more about mid-core games, so let's dive into that. Now, mid-core games make about 41% of the whole category revenue share, but if we would add some of the Asian-based games, it would be probably 60-65% of the whole revenue. What you can see from mid-core games as this year, we can see that the downloads have been steadily increasing, but kind of stabled off now, and some of the peaks can be seen just through the launch of new games. When it comes to revenue, it's quite stable. And here we have taken out the games that are majority Asian. We divide the mid-core into 5 different subcategories. We have the action games, we have card games, MOBAs, RPGs, and strategy. So, on the revenue side, how these are performing. What you can see first and foremost, you can see the action category increasing, and that is primarily driven by the rise of battle royale games. The strategy games, on the other hand, are declining. And this is due mainly to the saturation of the sort of a 4X March battle category, as well as the decline in Clash Royale, which is one of the biggest games in the category. The RPG games are declining as well, but they are much more driven by some of the biggest franchises like Summoner's War. If Summoner's War takes a dip, the whole category takes a dip. And MOBAs have stayed a niche, while card games have been kind of dominated by 2 games, Hearthstone and Yu-Gi-Oh! Battle. On download size, there's a whole different picture. So as you can see, the action game literally blew up in March and have been since increasing, but now the downloads have kind of stabled at around 60 million a month. And overall, when you can see the downloads of the other categories, they have been declining, and they have been declining even faster in terms of strategy and RPG after the launch of the Battle Royale games. So let's take a deeper look at the mid-core category. Now, as you can see, the action is still pretty small, only 8% of the overall, but Fortnite hasn't been out for that long, as well as the numbers for Fortnite are not that clear since they're surpassing Google Play. Strategy and RPG are the other 2 big ones. And if you look at the competitiveness of this category, it's not too great. We have most of the red balls are representing category that is owned by either 1 or 2 dominant players, so it's really hard to enter those. Battle Royale, if it's Fortnite and PUBG, very hard to get in. When it comes to snipers, FPS, tactical shooters, same thing. You have the World of Tanks, you have War Robots. In the MMOs, you have Lineage, you have Clash Royale and the Sync Battlers, Clash of Clans and the Build and Battle, and so forth and so forth. So very hard categories to enter. But there's still some of the blue ones where the competition still remains, and those are very big categories. So let's look at some of the most competitive ones, and let's start off with the most interesting one, and Battle Royale games. So, twice. This is essentially what Battle Royale games should be looking at. The ball is constantly growing. There's constantly new games coming out, and we're currently seeing the steady growth of both PUBG and Fortnite month after month with triple-digit percentages. So in 2018, this is kind of what happened. So NetEase came out and they said that they will copy a successful Steam game and put in a Twitch controls to a mobile and said that it was going to be a huge game. Then Bluehole came out and they said that they will port their successful console game at that point with those same crazy Twitch controls to mobile, and it will be huge. And Epic came out that we will port a console game with even Twitcher controls, and it will be even bigger. And of course, Yes, this is what we thought and didn't think much about it. But when we look at the streamer numbers, there was a storm coming. Clash Royale was dipping down. People weren't that interesting. PUBG was interesting, and Fortnite was just blowing out of the charts in terms of YouTube views. Almost a year later, 600 million installs and 600 million in net revenue. Probably the numbers are larger. So this is definitely a new category. And what we can see is it's not only dominated by two different games. Actually, one of the biggest one is, I can't really pronounce it, but it's called Knives Out, and it's one of the top games in Japan. So how does this category really work? Like, what's so new about it? We know that it's the battle royale system where one last person standing is going to win and so forth. But let's look at the business side of it. That's more interesting. So Battle Pass is the essential core idea on how these games monetize. And the way you unlock it, if you haven't played it, so this is more for those who haven't played Fortnite or PUBG, you essentially unlock new elements of the game during a season, and you can play either as a free player. This is all the stuff you unlock as you progress through XP and completing quests, and this is everything you unlock with the same progression if you are a VIP customer. So for reaching each tier, you get exclusive rewards, and they're usually based on skins, emotes, something you can share and show in the game because it's so social. And because the season is so limited, you're essentially in a reverse auction. So you're earning more and more and more, but unless you convert to this one, you're not getting all the rewards you're going to earn. And what the game does is it allows you to actually purchase XP, which is unique to any other game, so you can actually purchase experience and unlock everything faster. At the same time, even if you buy the rewards when you're at the last level of the season, like level 100, you will get everything you earned from the VIP till that point. So essentially you get more bang for the buck, and it's just asking at what point will you convert. So it's very effective in terms of engagement, but also in terms of retention, because you're constantly getting in and working towards your next reward. And if you paid for the VIP account, well, now you're even more engaged because you can unlock, and you can unlock only during the specific time you're playing the game. And we've seen PUBG take this exactly same progression mechanic from Fortnite, and they've actually tried to do it differently a little bit. So they tried to tune it in the beginning in Season 1. They tried to do a little bit shorter, only 4 weeks compared to the Fortnite's 10. And instead of doing 100 tiers, they gave you only 10 tiers, but they still asked you for $10. And that was not a good strategy. It did not work. Players were mad. Why are you giving us less value for what we're accustomed to? So they came in with more value than the Fortnite gives you, and now they're monetizing 3-4 times better than they were before. So essentially, why it monetizes so well is there's always these two layers. So you have the free and the paid one, and everyone can progress and unlock as many tiers they want as a free player. But you can also so the trick is basically the reverse auction, where you can go back and purchase everything that you had and unlock everything in the free layer. And this lasts for 10 weeks. It costs $10, and it has 100 tiers that you can unlock by either playing or paying. And the more you play, the more value you get. So the earlier you buy the Battle Pass, the more likely you're to play longer. And if you're towards the end of the season, you haven't unlocked everything, guess what? You can pay for XP and unlock what you couldn't unlock at that point. And if you don't, you get that feeling of missing out. And that's one of the most important monetization feelings you can have in a game, is that you're missing something that you should be having. So what are the pros and cons? Well, on the pro side, it's an extremely good feature as a retention, engagement, and conversion offer. It gets the free players. It's player friendly. Let's put it this way. I have personally worked on a lot of games that are trying to maximize the LTV. This is not one of those features. This is those features that tries to be fair to as many players as possible. And it's fairly easy to include other monetization mechanics, whether we're talking about ads or anything else, because there is a sort of a progression during those 10 weeks, and you can sell pieces of that progression to a player either with hard currency or views or whatnot. But there's also some cons. So usually what this requires is extremely high DAU to be successful. And what this means is the LTVs are pretty low. So, and then the second part, it's not really implementable in other type of games that have that power curve. So it really works in games that are so quote unquote fair. And what this takes us is, if we zoom out a little bit more and talk about pricing strategies, well, as you know, there's really three different pricing strategies. There's the profitability maximizations, there's defending a market from new entrants, as well as entering a new market through pricing. And we've seen this before. So when we talk about pricing strategy that is maximizing profits, we typically on console we talked about roll of tanks. It has normal power curve. Somebody has a better tank than you have. Guess what? You can pay money to get that better tank and destroy other players with weaker tanks. Clear. Maximize profits. Power curve. But we've had also this same type of strategy that Fortnite is using, which is defend the market from new entrants. And the perfect example of League of Legends. They offer an extremely large amount of content that they could monetize by a way higher price point. But instead they choose to put in a pretty low price point, making the market extremely hard to enter. Because in order to enter, not only you just can't compete with that amount of content, with that content creation, with their DAU, unless you happen to own the store in order to deliver the game and monetize even less. So Dota is a perfect example of entering a new market, because unlike League of Legends, they don't even sell the characters. They give you all the 140 characters right away. Here you go, just play the game, and by the way, we own the store as well, so we're not going to pay 30% to anybody, and they are able to do this type of strategy. Now this same thing is happening currently in the Battle Royale, where Fortnite is taking the place of closing the market from everybody else. If you want to enter, well, they have the content, and they're under-monetizing their content, which means that you have to not only match them, but you have to be at a greater loss for a long time. And they also took a page out of the Dota's page, or Valve's, by surpassing the Google Play, so they keep even higher margin. So it's really hard to compete them buck for buck. All right, so let's move on to the next part, which is the RPG games. And arguably, you can actually add puzzle RPG to this category, because it has been evolving so much, and the player base is getting even more and more male, and the gameplay is getting more and more deeper, that RPG category can actually grow to be the biggest grossing category on mobile. But in this one, I wanted to talk about turn-based RPGs. So when we look at turn-based RPGs, naturally in the West, the biggest one is Summoner's War. Currently, the revenues were dipping a little bit, but still around 16 million a month, probably way higher in terms of net revenue. And at the moment, it is the second largest category in mid-core games. Downloads are very stagnant, and the revenue growth has been increasing, but now a little bit down for a while. And what makes this category especially interesting, why it's a blue ball instead of one of those red balls, is that all the top games are surprisingly different. And why the sort of Asian type of games are out of this is, as you can see, if we compare the Summoner's War to one of the top Chinese games, they really can't be compared. They're just so much larger, which kind of speaks of the growth potential of the category, because this is happening in the East, and we've been pretty steadily following whatever is happening in the Eastern market. So what are the different ways to succeed in an RPG market, in this type of market where the revenues are extremely high and growing and growing? Well, previously we had games like Heroes Charge, which had a very simple core gameplay mechanic and kind of interesting meta game, as well as kind of poor graphics. So we had a same game with an IP, and it succeeded extremely well in Scopely's Walking Dead game. Then we had a game that had better graphics and even deeper meta game, all the 3D. Summoner's War did extremely well and is doing extremely well. Then we have exactly the same game, but with Star Wars IP, and that game is doing really, really well. Then we had a game that is cheaper production values, but more tactical gameplay. Again, over 100 million of revenues in a few months. And finally, we have a game with cheaper production values, absolutely no gameplay, and only core meta gameplay mechanics, and it's doing extremely well. So what's common between these very different type of games that are all succeeding? And this is very different than any other market where all the games are looking pretty much the same and they're competing who has the better graphics, who has the better user acquisition, who has the better IP. Here everybody's different, IPs or no IPs. But there are nominators. Number one, it's live operations. The game feel always different, they feel always fresh. You come in, they optimize the game for each player. The new content that is added to the game is always tied to the gacha, which highly increases the LTV and as well as makes the makes that sense of you're going to lose something if you're not playing this game this month. They're extremely deep, and the metagames are constantly evolving further and further. And in all of these games, the depth comes over accessibility and over the core gameplay. These games are not hyper casual. You can't prove them out in 1 week. You can't prove them out on the paper. They require you to build it in order to see how it functions. But core gameplay, not as important. So let's look at a case where with two turn-based RPG games that are essentially the same, but they have just different IPs. In this case, Star Wars, as well as Marvel's Strike Force. So when the games launched, there's actually three different turn-based RPG games that all have some kind of superheroes and all have to different degree successful IPs. We have DC Comic Legends, we have Star Wars, and then we have the latest one, Strike Force. So what we can see is when Strike Force launched, it actually halved the revenue from Star Wars. So this is every time we do on market research or we create a case for launching a game, we always say like, well, this is the pie. Once we launch our game, we're going to take this slice out of the pie. That never happens. In this case, it happened. So what it means is that you need to understand your audience really well, and you need to execute flawlessly. And one of these three games didn't perform in that matter, but that's a different case. So that's turn-based RPGs, and I want to talk about two more things. So number one is the MOBAs. So as you can see, the MOBA market is very small, but you're probably thinking like, well, no, it's not. Arena of Valor is huge. It's making $2 billion a year, and Tencent is putting restrictions that you can't even play it before face recognition and whatnot. That's true, but yes, and the revenues are amazing. 2.5 of net revenue, probably $3 billion. Just amazing game, constantly growing. Nobody can stop it. But when you look at the revenues and you divide it by countries, what you can see is the first Western market is U.S. and it's making about 0.4% of all the revenue in the U.S. So it's very, very China-driven, very Asia-specific game. So it's not really a good benchmark here. Now, when we look at the MOBAs, what we've seen is that the most of revenue has been coming from Asia-Pacific and China as well. And we've also seen that the esports have not given the same expected boost, and Vainglory is a great example. They've been running all kind of esports events. They've had all the help from Apple you can possibly ask, as well as Amazon and Samsung and so forth, but the growth has not really shown that it helps them. And we have seen, though, that the influencers, different kind of streamers, have been pretty important growth channel for these type of games. And in fact, Mobile Legends is one of the most streamed mobile games at the moment, way higher than Clash Royale. So what makes this interesting and why I'm going through MOBAs is the kind of a possible new category in terms of brawlers. So brawlers is kind of between the shooters, the classical ones with Guns of Boom or Walking War or War Robots, and it's between those shooters and between the MOBAs, which are more isometric, very meta game focused. So they have that shoot 'em up aspect, and they have a little bit of a same view as with the MOBAs, but without the same kind of in-game depth. And naturally, this is category driven pretty much by Supercell's newest game, and that is Brawl Stars. And when we look at the Brawl Stars success in terms of category ranking in Canadian market where they launched, it didn't look that it's going to be a big hit. You have the first start, then you have the first big update, and the game is a little bit changed, and then it's declining, again a big change, and again a big decline. The reasons why the game was suffering so much, there's actually 4 things. The number one is the art style. While you can say it's really cute, it's really fun, when you compare it to any other brawler or MOBA type of game, it doesn't really stand well against them. It's just not that high of a quality. The second one is the progression system, which essentially gives the reason for players to pay and play. And in the beginning, the progression system was really, really simple, and it went through multiple different changes. It went from elixirs and tokens to different type of matches and badges to the current system, which is pretty much just like in Clash Royale, a simple power progression, but with very minimal power progression because they have to be somewhat fair. The third reason was the lack of gameplay depth. It's really fun to play in the beginning, but then you kind of get over it. It doesn't give you different ways to play it, unlike MOBAs. And finally was the controls. They were difficult. So it started off with the tap or joystick. Even Supercell wasn't sure which way they should go. Then they changed the from landscape to portrait during soft launch. So major changes, just trying to constantly fit this game into the market. And the question was always, is this a billion-dollar franchise? Because we know that Supercell doesn't launch anything unless they can prove that it is. And at that point, we thought, like, no, it's definitely not a billion-dollar franchise. But then, if you look at the previous stuff, we talked about MOBAs, how they're very successful in Asia Pacific. Supercell did a soft launch in Singapore, and as you can see, it's performing totally different way. So, same game, different market, and right now, it does look like this game is going to launch, but it's not going to be big in the West, but instead the category is more growing in the East. So when it comes to MOBAs, successful in Asia and Pacific, China. Till date, there's only marginal traction in the West. Mobile Legends, Arena of Valor, even with Superman and Batman and Joker, couldn't make it. I predict that Brawl Stars is going to launch globally, and that the brawler category is going to emerge, but it's not going to emerge in the West like we thought. Instead, it's going to emerge in the Eastern market. And this is a segue to the last point. So the last point is, well, it's going to be esports. And when we talk about esports, we're essentially focusing on one key category. Oh, I missed the ball, but we're going to focus on the synchronous battlers. And when we're talking about synchronous battlers, we're essentially talking about one single game, which is Clash Royale. And here's the revenue of Clash Royale, which kind of shows you why Supercell is also trying to launch Brawl Stars. This is, you know, somewhat of a decline over the last year, especially influenced by launch of the around here was the launch of Fortnite. So you can start seeing the big decline over there. The category is created and owned by Clash Royale, and it's a highly profitable category with revenues even now after a steep decline of over $30 million of net revenue a month. Lifetime, it's estimated that it's been downloaded about 350 million times and grossed at least $1.5 billion in net revenues. And the revenue has been down about 25% and even more after the launch of Fortnite, and with more games coming out that type, battle royale games, we can see that the decline will continue. So Supercell came in with a different type of growth strategy, and they started investing into Clash Royale Esports. And we saw, you probably all saw in August that they did big announcements. So there's a new season launched in August. They're going to launch Esports, and it was covered by multiple outlets throughout the world, anywhere and everywhere. And it was boosted by the key esports franchises. So you had everything from Team Solo Mid to Cloud9's participating in this new type of esports tournament. And it was also based on different regions. So you had a specific region for China, you had a specific region for Europe, US, South America. So very well built esports. And what we can see is that it didn't really have impacts on the downloads. And yes, there's an impact on the revenue, but you can arguably say that that was one of the latest updates as well, because the update actually came in and introduced new characters. So when we look more about the Clash Royale esports, we can see the views. And when we look at the views of the top esports channels, we have the top 5 Clash Royale League moments, about 381,000 views for 6 days, as well as top 5 moments, 72K views. And at the same time, you can look at the normal videos that they're pushing out. And this is essentially one of the artists showing in how he drew a goblin giant, and that's getting 1.2 million views in roughly the same amount of time. So the views are minimal compared to any other type of videos for the channel, and overall the channel has only 130,000 subscribers compared to the and 25 million views compared to the main channel with 5.5 subscribers, as well as over 500 million of views. 500 million of views. So what about the competition? Is this the end of Clash Royale? Is that it, that they can't grow? Well, not really. I mean, what we can see is the Clash Royale has been steadily destroying every other game that is come out or is coming out. So this is by far not the end of Clash Royale, but what it shows is that esports is not that big of a growth driver in mobile, in my opinion, as it was predicted to be. Because we see a game that is this huge, a category owner, doing everything and anything for esports and not seeing any big effect. Well, there's a question: should you invest in esports then? So mid-core games in 2019. As with casual games, the majority of growth is on the revenue, not download side. And we can see that the top games in the East are generating much more revenue than our versions in the West. So there's a lot of things that we can again learn, just like we learned in the games like Game of War. The IPs and themes are becoming crucial to lower the CPIs. So it's not always the IP, but we've seen a lot of 4X games that are changing the IPs, FunPlus being a good example, starting it with the fantasy theme, then introducing another team and lowering their CPIs by 50% through the theme. That's a viable strategy when you're spending $100 million for user acquisition. The RPGs will become the biggest category in terms of revenue on mid-core. That's a prediction. And there's going to be a new subcategory in terms of brawlers, but it's going to be more of a category in the East. We've seen a lot of different type of Western brawlers launch before Brawl Stars. None of them gained traction. And the blending of different type of genres will continue, and we've seen this mostly in the puzzle RPG, where different type of puzzle mechanics are coming in with the deep RPG mechanics. And finally, or most finally, virtual D-pad and longer session are back on the menu. Previously, if you tried to do anything that is longer than the Starbucks line test, so meaning that it takes you longer to play a session than you ordering a Starbucks coffee, that was a no-no. But currently, with players playing 45 minutes on a straight one sitting, well, it has changed the market. And finally, esports will remain more of a curiosity than a growth driver, while the influencers and streamers will be actually the ones that the companies will be using more and more heavily to drive growth. And we've seen this with Lineage and some of the latest games as well, where they're leveraging a vast majority of streamers, not just choosing on a few different ones, but having a streamer network that is localized for different markets and driving growth through that because of the quality users that are coming in through those videos. So that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. Just gonna